what we see if we look to Washington, if you can stand to look to Washington, is the 118th Congress. And obviously it's been dominated by total dysfunction because of Trump and the Christian fascists. And there are bitter divisions within the Christian Fascist Party. What used to be the Republican Party, which doesn't exist anymore, even though the name is used. So I'll continue to use the name. A number of these Republicans, particularly from the so-called governing wing, that would be those people who are not aligned with the Q-bitch, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or the rapist, Matt Gaetz. But the governing wing, so many of them are heading for the exits. They don't want any more of this bullshit. And so far, according to CNN, 23 of these Republican lawmakers have decided not to seek re-election, or they've resigned early, including the chairpersons of 5 committees. Now, the number, or I should say the caliber, and the timing of some of these so-called retirements have gotten some of the standard Republicans, there are a few that still exist, pretty upset. Especially rank and file Republicans in the House and the Senate are worried because some of these committee chair seats are being given up. And House Republicans were shocked by some of these recent high-profile retirements that announced by their colleagues. But, you know, it's not surprising when you consider the miserable state of affairs in the legislative branch of our government that's been caused by these Christian fascists. Representative Ken Buck of Colorado, who's been making a name for himself lately, he is a conservative who's retiring after going against the Christian fascists on several key issues. But Ken Buck said, quote, "They've signed up to do serious things, and we're not doing serious things," end quote. Serious things. That would be governing the country, right? Then there's Representative Don Bacon of Nebraska, who self-identifies as a moderate, who represents a swing seat in Nebraska. He pointed to his party's struggle to govern on any level as driving these departures. People are saying, "I'm out of here." Mr. Bacon, Don Bacon said this, quote, "When you're divided in your own conference, the joy of the job is harder. When you have folks on your own team with their knives out, it makes it less enjoyable." Yeah, well, I would think so, but that's a pretty good vision that old Don Bacon has conjured up here. Then there's Representative Carlos Jimenez of Florida, who is an ally of the former Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. Mr. Jimenez said this is not how he or many of his colleagues imagined life would be like in the majority party once they got control. He said, quote, "I thought that some of our members would be smarter," end quote. And he added this, quote, "A lot of us are frustrated with what's going on, and that's just being flat out honest. It's foolish, and it's been proven to be foolish. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result," end quote. Well, that's one definition. That's become more or less a cliche, my friend. Energy and Commerce Chair Kathy Rogers of Washington State is not even term limited yet in her position. While the Select Committee on China chairperson, Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, who was once seen as the future of the party, he's only 39. He recently announced he was leaving Congress after he got real intense bullshit for voting against impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Now that was what? 10 days ago. And already Mike Gallagher has said, I've had enough, and he's leaving. And the Energy and Commerce Committee alone, the one chaired by Kathy Rogers of Washington, it really is a highly sought after assignment. There are 8 Republicans on that committee who are retiring. And Representative Greg Pence of Indiana, I think he's related to Mike Pence, he's among the members on the panel hanging up his voting card on the Energy and Commerce Committee. He said, quote, "Those are big losses for us. It's alarming, especially for the institutional knowledge. So that's a big deal," end quote. Well, institutional knowledge to these Christian fascists is something to rip up by the roots and toss to the curb. They don't want institutional knowledge. As so many of these scum have said, when they hold up an upside-down Bible, all they need to know about governing is in that book. That's how crazy it's gotten. And they're dead serious, and they will do anything they can to eliminate the idea of representative government and replace it with some kind of insanity that they see advocated in the Bible, for God's sake. New Testament, Old Testament, which is it going to be, folks? And which version of the Bible? And is it Protestant or Catholic? What do you people really have in mind? Now, this wave of retirements apparently is really upsetting some of the so-called Republicans who are choosing to stick around. And these Republicans who have decided to stay are worried about a potential, don't laugh, brain drain as more senior members decide they've had it and head for the exits. And when people who have been in Congress for a while, even for a year or two, when they leave, they take with them institutional knowledge that the next person who comes in has to start from square one, more or less. Representative August Pfluger of Texas said, quote, "You get this panic and anxiety, like, okay, who's going to step up? Is this a normal thing that happens every few years, or is it actually abnormal? So yeah, I'm very worried about it," end quote. Representative Tom Cole of Oklahoma, who is a veteran, he's been there since his Lord and Master was a teenager, but Tom Cole said, quote, "Look, it hasn't been pleasant. There's no question about that. But we have a lot of great young members, and I've looked at a lot of the recruits coming in, so I'm not too worried," end quote. And then you have the so-called Freedom Caucus, which is anything but. The chair of that group is Bob Good, a rabble-rousing asshole who is being partly blamed for the turbulence in the House. This guy, Bob Good, a Christian fascist, he seems to relish in the departure of some of his colleagues. He said this, quote, "Brain drain? Well, why don't you survey the country and see if there is any brain drain in Congress? Congress has a 20% approval rating. Most of what we do to the country is bad. I think retirements are a wonderful thing. I have no concerns, zero concerns. We probably need a few more retirements," end quote. So what that jerkwad is saying is that, yeah, only 20% of America approves of the Congress, so let's drive it even lower until it eventually gets to zero, and then it can be abolished, and then we can establish Christian fascism. You think I'm exaggerating? Come on, Truth Seeker. You know as well as I do. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.